Hey everybody, Coach here. Man, I'm glad that you took a few minutes to join me here today. Hey, I am going native. I'm going native this week. But to prevent anybody from any retinal burn, it's not that kind of native, okay? You know, all the time I find a lot of posts and a lot of comments in online forums about going native. The solution to people's landscape problems are going native. Well, you know something? I have some thoughts about that today. Some of you may agree with them, some of you may not. And quite frankly, I don't care because they're my thoughts and they're rooted and based in experience. So once again, I'm glad you're here and let's get this video rolling. This is a channel for DIY landscape education theories and concepts. I'm Matt, you can call me Coach. After 20 years of a successful landscape career, I know what the hell I'm talking about and I'm here to bring it to you. The new self-reliant, educated DIY homeowner of today. So like many people, as a matter of fact, thousands and thousands of people, they go online to various forums like Facebook groups and Reddit. And they try to solve their problems by throwing the situation out there. And I don't get frustrated and I don't get mad because, you know, people know what they know and they don't know what they don't know. And I get a little perturbed when I hear people use the canned response, go native. Find local native solutions to your ornamental landscape problems. And there's a couple of thoughts that I want to impart on you. So at the end of this video, if you decide to start exploring native flora for your landscape, you probably have a better knowledge-based decision in place to go one way or another. One of the things that I see a lot is when someone says, you should really check into native plants for your area and use those instead of blah, blah, blah. In that particular case, what I also don't see is I don't see actual varieties and actual planting schemes and how they may have an ornamental landscape already, 90% of it, but they've got this 10% problem area. And that native plants are going to solve that particular problem. And that, most of the times, is not the case. And here's why. You know, one of the things that a lot of people they're not aware of and they don't realize is that thousands upon thousands of ornamental cultivar plants, the ones that we find at our local garden centers and nurseries, those originated from native plants. They were hybridized and cultivated from those, and some of the good was retained and some of the bad was left behind during the hybridization process. And it's something you really have to be aware of should you try to revert to the original native plant itself. One thing that native plants, no matter what the variety, their main concern when they're growing and they're active and they're healthy, they have two things in mind: reproduction and spread of the species. You know, come to think of it, that's kind of like humans. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, kind of like humans. Reproduction and spread of the species. But in this particular case, reproduction and spread of the species can be quite damaging to an ornamental landscape. I'll share an example with you. A plant that came on the market many years ago, and people started to learn of it from seeing it at neighbors' yards where I used to work and practice. It was called Mexican feathergrass. And it's a beautiful, flowing in the breeze, very tall, erect, but very fine bladed grass. And when that thing goes to seed, if you are not on it, if you do not deadhead that plant before it starts to cast off, you will have Mexican feathergrass not only in your yard, but your neighbor's yard, the school yard 2 blocks down the street, because it casts off seed like crazy. I got a family member that planted it in Northern California, and within 3 years, it took all of his being in order to get it out and never have it in the yard again. So there's a native of Mexico, a native plant that really truly, unless you're on top of it regularly, is not meant for an ornamental landscape. It's really not. With the exception of if you happen to be in a high arid desert foothill landscape where Mexican feathergrass survives and thrives, unless you want to replicate its natural surroundings and you don't care. So if you had a native environment of like 50 acres or more and you didn't really care if it propagated itself, then hey, have at it. But most of us, most of the folks that I talk to on the crew out there, you know, you guys are residential suburbanites that have the typical ornamental residential landscape, and I don't think that particular plant would work for you. Well, there's hundreds of other natives out there that it's very, very hard to take that native plant where it is meant to grow, where Mother Nature and the guy upstairs, you know, said, hey, I want this plant in this place and I'm going to create this environment around it and it's going to serve the purpose of this. That's what a native plant was originally meant for. Now, can you replicate that in your front or backyard? That's the big question. So, when you have a landscape problem, something that needs to be addressed, is native plant a possible solution? Perhaps. But if you think of the ornamental landscapes, not only when you were growing up, when I was growing up, and what you have now, most of the time there are certain needs and wants of that landscape that oftentimes exclude the environment for those native plants. You have family needs such as pets and dog run, grass and play area for the kids, maybe a vegetable garden, water features, concrete and lighting, and the other types of elements that go along with an ornamental landscape. In theory, native plant material can be used in an ornamental landscape, but under very narrow window of conditions and solutions. It just can't be applied to anything. And the one thing about ornamental landscapes is that people kind of want to have the success the first time. They want to go and make the investment and spend their resources and have success. They don't want to have a, well, maybe it'll work type of attitude going into it using native plants. And most native plant growers, bless their hearts, they're great at what they do, but oftentimes they don't always guarantee their plant material because they don't know the situation that that native plant is going to go into. No matter how much education the nursery person at that native plant nursery says, you need to put it in this, you need to water it here, you need to give it this much sun, and it can't have this, that, and this. Well, that's not the norm for most residential homeowners. They have many, many needs and wants, like I just mentioned, and all the time it doesn't always work for that native cultivar to be put in. But heck, you know, if you looked at California lilac, the variety Ceanothus, if you look at Sunset Western Garden Book and see all the hundreds of cultivars that have been made from the original California lilacs out there, they've taken the monster 20-foot tree bush and they've shrunk it down to a residential landscape size without all the other issues and size that goes along with it. You know, if you needed a real drought-tolerant, hillside retaining, soil-preserving type of ground cover, look into things like Carmel creeper, the Ceanothus that goes to about 2 to 2.5 feet tall. And you can use that as a cultivated native plant. And there you go. You don't have something that's 20 feet tall, you got something that's 2.5 feet tall. Manzanita. Manzanita is a native plant, but out in the wild in many cases, and in some cases like the emerald carpet, that's the closest native I've ever seen that is just like what's out there in the mountainous areas of the West. And fantastic ground cover type of plant, but you can't put it next to plants that require a lot of water because you'll just rot it out because it does not want to have water all the time. But if it's combined with other arid loving type of plant material, you can make it work. It's just, once again, that little window of success gets a little bit smaller. Most of the time, if you took a look in my backdrop over my shoulder, you know, we've got ferns, we've got native perennials, we've got trees and their canopy, and all the perennials and ferns and ground covers that are on the forest floor. You can't take them and throw them out in a full sun area. They're not going to work because they're an understory type of plant. And if you have that situation, fine. If you have a brand new landscape in a brand new residential development, chances are you don't have a lot of trees growing yet, so it may be years or decades before you could have something that is, you know, fern covered like the backdrop that is behind me. So be very aware when you read and see things like, you really need to get a hold of your local college extension branch and find out the native plants that thrive well in your area, and that will be your solution, ma and pa homeowner, to the problem that you have. Not always, not always. You know, you sometimes have what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, here's a great example. A nursery plant. And I don't mean a nursery like what's at the store type of nursery. I'm talking about a nursery plant that I saw out in the desert Southwest, where cactus love to snug up against things like ironwood and other native bushes. And when that new saguaro or that new prickly pear or that new cholla cactus start to emerge, they have to be up underneath these nursery plants in order to be shaded and to grow slowly and to grow in a drip zone of another plant. And then once they really get their thing on, then they start to grow up and out. And by that time, the nursery plant has reached its maximum years. It starts to die off and the cactus takes over. So you got that in your backyard? Chances are you do not. You do not. So you have to be aware of what kind of things are needed in and around. You have companion plants. You have pollinators that have to have certain companions next to them in order for them to thrive. Well, Coach, if I'm reading you right, you're really kind of anti-native plant then, aren't you, buddy? Actually, I'm not. I'm really not. There are ways that you can use natives and actually be successful with them. If I was going to go native, and I mean pure native, I couldn't do it. But if I was going to do it, say I went to a place and I had 10 acres, and I had woodlot, and I had meadow, and I had driveway, and then I had house area. I would probably, if I was going to be challenged to go native, I would probably have 9 acres of native that I would maintain in a fashion of fire break, firewood if I needed it, pathways that I could walk or run, hike or do whatever. And then around the dwelling itself, around my dwelling, I would either mow down to whatever weekly or monthly maintenance was needed, and then I would install some of the ornamental features that I would still enjoy getting older, like a raised vegetable garden bed, a small fruit tree orchard, and those types of things, but they would be just a 10% percentage of my whole 10-acre native plot. That's how I would probably end up going native if I was really going to do it. You know, when I was designing and contracting and putting in landscapes for folks for the past 20 years, I would come across those folks that had done some research. They had done their due diligence and they wanted native plants. And yet the environment or the situation that they were in, the project site, didn't always dictate native plants would work. And through an educational process and showing them, like the California lilac situation, like the Mexican feathergrass situation, I would use different plants that had been cultivated from those and introduce those into the design and then educate them about this is native, it's just a ornamental cultivar of the original native plant. And it'll survive next to your bluegrass fescue lawn where there's all kinds of moisture in the area underneath. So that's how I kind of got through it. I educated myself enough in order to say, all right, so you want to have manzanita to control your small sloping hillside that you have. Rather than go out and get the original manzanita, let's try that emerald carpet and see how that does. And we'll mix in some California lilac and some other drought tolerant plants in order to succeed. And that usually filled the bill. They kind of understood. They would go back and verify what I was saying, and then they'd say, hey, thanks for teaching us what you taught us. Let's move forward with the project. So one of the things that I bring this to your attention for is I want you to be able to make a knowledge-based decision, and knowledge-based on your own research, not just a post on Reddit. I want you to be able to know that there are native solutions out there, but just know the pros and the cons that go along with it. Don't just take everything at face value. When I post things on Reddit under our landscaping and our gardening and that kind of stuff, I make gosh darn sure that I am putting stuff out there that can be validated. I know it's validated up here, but I don't throw crap out there, and I certainly don't throw stuff out there with the word native attached to it unless I've gone and researched the hell out of it and put it on there, and maybe with links or something like that. But for those folks who are out there saying go native, I just caution you. It sounds like an easy solution, but in an ornamental landscape setting, sometimes they don't always work. Well, that's kind of the most polarizing, most controversial video that Coach has done to this date. I guarantee you that. Anyway, hey, don't forget to check out the website. Check out that book, that ebook, Landscaping Simplified. I think you'd really enjoy it. And for a $20 expenditure, you would have an A to Z, great read, for a weekend, and really sharpen your educational mental tool shed there, so you can take on any landscape, not only yours, but family and friends too. There's nothing more filled with pride when you can come in and solve mom and dad's solution, or your cousins, or your sis's, or whatever, because you've got the education underneath you now. Also, check out Homescape 1.0. It's only going to be available for a short period longer, and then I'm pulling it off and doing a couple of tweaks on it. But if you're really interested, youryardcoach.com. I always have it right here. Guys, thanks for joining me today. I look forward to bringing you something next week. If you've got any questions, if you got any solutions, please leave them in the comments below, and I will catch you next week. Thank you very much. You guys take care.